What did the Buddha say about rebirth and Kamma? There is still the question, though, of why the Buddha felt compelled to discuss the issue of karma and rebirth. We know that he refused to take a position on other issues that were hotly contested at the time, such as whether the cosmos was eternal or not. Majjhima Nikaya 63, Cula-Malunkyovada Sutta, the shorter instructions to Malunkya. So, what led him to take a position here? The first part of the answer is that knowledge of rebirth formed an integral part of his awakening experience, playing a role in all three knowledges that led to his attainment of total release. Knowledge about karma played a role in the second and third. In the first knowledge, he recollected many eons of his own previous lives. When the mind was thus concentrated, purified, bright, unblemished, rid of defilement, pliant, malleable, steady, and attained to imperturbability, I directed it to the knowledge of recollecting my past lives. I recollected my manifold past lives, that is, 1 birth, 2, 5, 10, 50, 100, 1,000, 100,000, many eons of cosmic contraction, many eons of cosmic expansion, many eons of cosmic contraction and expansion. There I had such a name, belonged to such a clan, had such an appearance. Such was my food, such my experience of pleasure and pain, such the end of my life. Passing away from that state, I reappeared there. There too I had such a name, belonged to such a clan, had such an appearance. Such was my food, such my experience of pleasure and pain, such the end of my life. Passing away from that state, I reappeared here. Thus I remembered my manifold past lives in their modes and details. This was the first knowledge I attained in the first watch of the night. Ignorance was destroyed, knowledge arose, darkness was destroyed, light arose, as happens in one who is heedful, ardent, and resolute. Majjhima Nikaya 19, Dvedhavitaka Sutta, Two Sorts of Thinking. In the second watch of the night, he gained his second knowledge, vision of how living beings at large are reborn after death. When the mind was thus concentrated, purified, bright, unblemished, rid of defilement, pliant, malleable, steady, and attained to imperturbability, I directed it to the knowledge of the passing away and reappearance of beings. I saw, by means of the divine eye, purified and surpassing the human, beings passing away and reappearing, and I discerned how they are inferior and superior, beautiful and ugly, fortunate and unfortunate in accordance with their karma. These beings, who were endowed with bad conduct of body, speech, and mind, who reviled the noble ones, held wrong views and undertook actions under the influence of wrong views, with the breakup of the body after death, have reappeared in a plane of deprivation, a bad destination, a lower realm, hell. But these beings, who were endowed with good conduct of body, speech, and mind, who did not revile the noble ones, who held right views and undertook actions under the influence of right views, with the breakup of the body, after death, have reappeared in a good destination, a heavenly world. Thus, by means of the divine eye, purified and surpassing the human, I saw beings passing away and reappearing, and I discerned how they are inferior and superior, beautiful and ugly, fortunate and unfortunate in accordance with their karma. This was the second knowledge I attained in the second watch of the night. Ignorance was destroyed, knowledge arose, darkness was destroyed, light arose, as happens in one who is heedful, ardent, and resolute. Men 19. In the third knowledge, In the third knowledge of the night, the Buddha took the insights gained from the second knowledge on the macro level of experience, concerning the role of actions, intentions, and views in shaping events throughout the cosmos over time, and applied them to the micro level, events immediately present in his own mind. He found that the same causal pattern operated on both levels, one of the most important insights leading to his awakening. He investigated the micro level even further to discover which intentions and views might lead to an end of intentions, and 4.235, and an end of views, and 10.93, and so to an end of rebirth. And he discovered his answer in views that were expressed in terms of the Four Noble Truths about stress. When the mind was thus concentrated, purified, bright, unblemished, rid of defilement, pliant, malleable, steady, and attained to imperturbability, I directed it to the knowledge of the ending of the effluence. I discerned, as it had come to be, that this is stress. This is the origination of stress. This is the cessation of stress. This is the way leading to the cessation of stress. These are effluents. This is the origination of effluence. This is the cessation of effluence. This is the way leading to the cessation of effluence. My heart, thus knowing, thus seeing, was released from the effluent of sensuality, released from the effluent of becoming, released from the effluent of ignorance. With release, there was the knowledge, released. I discerned that birth is ended, the holy life fulfilled, the task done. There is nothing further for this world. This was the third knowledge I attained in the third watch of the night. Ignorance was destroyed, knowledge arose, darkness was destroyed, light arose, as happens in one who is heedful, ardent, and resolute. MN 19. In this way, the ending of birth realized through the third knowledge affirmed the truth of the first two knowledges. By employing the right view that leads to actions that put an end to birth, the third knowledge showed that the act of intention is what fuels the process of repeated birth to begin with. This means that knowledge about rebirth and its connection with action was an integral part of the knowledge that precipitated and followed his full release. Still, the fact that his awakening included knowledge about rebirth doesn't fully explain why, when he began teaching, he addressed the topic. After all, on his own testimony, there were many other things he learned in the course of his awakening that he didn't see fit to include in his teaching because they weren't conducive in leading his listeners to their own release. He limited himself to teaching the Four Noble Truths because they are connected with the goal, relate to the rudiments of the holy life, and lead to disenchantment, to dispassion, to cessation, to calm, to direct knowledge, to self-awakening, to unbinding. SN 56.31. This suggests that he saw an intimate connection between the topic of rebirth and the Four Noble Truths. And it turns out that when we examine these truths, we find that rebirth does play a prominent role in the understanding of stress that forms the first noble truth. In the understanding of the causes of stress, craving and clinging, that form the second noble truth, and in the transcendent right view that guides the path of practice to the end of stress, the fourth noble truth. It also plays a prominent role in the mundane level of right view that provides the context for understanding the meaning and purpose of the Four Noble Truths. The relationship between the two levels of right view, mundane and transcendent, parallels the relationship between the first and second knowledges on the night of his awakening on the one hand, and the third knowledge on the other. Both serve a strategic purpose. Mundane right view, framed in terms of beings and worlds, asserts the efficacy of action, the principle that actions really do have results. This principle opens the possibility that transcendent right view, as a guide to action, can put an end to suffering. Transcendent right view then drops terms of beings and worlds to focus directly on the actions within the mind that cause suffering so that those actions can be abandoned. This brings suffering to an end, at which point all views are put aside as well. To assert the efficacy of action, mundane right view makes the point, against Pakuda Kachayana, that there is such a thing as action, and, against Ajita Kesakambalan and Makali Gosala, that it actually engenders results. Because the Four Noble Truths teach that suffering and stress are the results of actions and can be brought to an end through actions, this understanding of action is necessary to explain why the Four Noble Truths offer a realistic picture of what a human being can do to bring suffering to an end. In a direct negation of the annihilationist view that Ajita Kesakambalin expounded, the standard definition of mundane right view states, "There is what is given, what is offered, what is sacrificed. There are fruits and results of good and bad actions. There is this world and the next world. There is mother and father. There are spontaneously reborn beings. There are contemplatives and Brahmins who, faring rightly and practicing rightly, proclaim this world and the next after having directly known and realized it for themselves." Majjhima Nikaya 117, Mahakatarisaka Sutta, the Great 40. The phrase next world in this passage refers to life after death. The reference to what is given, etc., asserts that these actions actually are the results of conscious choices and do bear fruit as well-being and happiness. The reference to contemplatives and Brahmins who know both worlds is a statement of conviction. One may not know the next world on one's own, but one is convinced that there are those who have trained their minds to the point where they know it directly. Because contemplatives and Brahmins, in the context of this passage, are those who have successfully followed the path to awakening, and because anyone is potentially capable of doing the same, this statement of conviction functions as a working hypothesis. You take these matters on faith until you can confirm them for yourself. One reason the Buddha recommended conviction in rebirth as a useful working hypothesis is that, as we have noted, he had to teach that skillful human action was powerful and reliable enough to put an end to suffering, and his teaching on the consequences of skillful and unskillful action would be incomplete and therefore indefensible without reference to rebirth. This is because the distinction he draws between skillful and unskillful is based on the consequences of the actions. The working out of karma may be complex, but skillful actions always lead in the direction of happiness and well-being. Unskillful actions always lead in the direction of suffering and harm. This distinction provides not only the definition of these concepts, but also the motivation for abandoning unskillful actions and developing skillful ones in their place. This motivation is necessary, for while people are not innately bad, they are also not innately good. When heedless of the consequences of their actions, they behave unskillfully. This is why, as the Buddha noted, heedfulness lies at the root of all skillfulness, and 10.15. To develop skillful qualities, people need to see the dangers of unskillful behavior and the advantages of skillful behavior. Because actions can sometimes take many lifetimes to yield their results, a complete and convincing case that unskillful actions should always be avoided and skillful ones always developed requires the perspective that comes only from seeing the results of actions over many lifetimes. Of course, some of the results of actions often do appear in this lifetime. As Ven Ananda was sitting there, the Blessed One said to him, "I say categorically, Ananda, that bodily misconduct, verbal misconduct, and mental misconduct should not be done. Given that the Blessed One has declared that bodily misconduct, verbal misconduct, and mental misconduct should not be done, what drawbacks can one expect when doing what should not be done? One can fault oneself. Observant people, on close examination, criticize one. One's bad reputation gets spread about. One dies confused. And, with the breakup of the body after death, one reappears in a plane of deprivation, a bad destination, a lower realm, hell. I say categorically, Ananda, that good bodily conduct, good verbal conduct, and good mental conduct should be done. Given that the Blessed One has declared that good bodily conduct, good verbal conduct, and good mental conduct should be done, what rewards can one expect when doing what should be done? One doesn't fault oneself. Observant people, on close examination, praise one. One's good reputation gets spread about. One dies unconfused. And, with the breakup of the body after death, one reappears in a good destination, a heavenly world. And 2.18. For people who have trouble assuming a life after death, the consequences of action that are visible in this lifetime might seem enough to engender heedfulness. However, the Buddha notes that misconduct often leads to rewards in the present life, and he heaps ridicule on those who insist that the results of good and bad actions always appear in the here and now. There are, headman, some contemplatives and Brahmins who hold a doctrine and view like this. All those who kill living beings experience pain and distress in the here and now. All those who take what is not given, who engage in illicit sex, who tell lies experience pain and distress in the here and now. Now there is the case where a certain person is seen garlanded and adorned, freshly bathed and groomed with hair and beard trimmed, enjoying the sensualities of women as if he were a king. They ask about him, "My good man, what has this man done that he has been garlanded and adorned, as if he were a king?" They answer, "My good man, this man attacked the king's enemy and took his life. The king, gratified with him, rewarded him. That is why he is garlanded and adorned, as if he were a king." Then there is the case where a certain person is seen bound with a stout rope with his arms pinned tightly against his back, his head shaved bald, marched to a harsh-sounding drum from street to street, crossroads to crossroads, evicted through the south gate, and beheaded to the south of the city. They ask about him, "My good man, what has this man done that he is bound with a stout rope and beheaded to the south of the city?" They answer, "My good man, this man, an enemy of the king, has taken the life of a man or a woman. That is why the rulers, having had him seized, inflicted such a punishment upon him." The Buddha then cites similar cases where some people are rewarded for stealing, engaging in illicit sex, and lying, whereas other people are punished. Now what do you think, headman? Have you ever seen or heard of such a case? I have seen this, Lord, have heard of it, and will hear of it again in the future. So, headman, when those contemplatives and Brahmins who hold a doctrine and view like this say, all those who kill living beings, etc., experience pain and distress in the here and now, do they speak truthfully or falsely? Falsely, Lord. And those who babble empty falsehood, are they moral or immoral? Immoral, Lord. And those who are immoral and of evil character, are they practicing wrongly or rightly? Wrongly, Lord. And those who are practicing wrongly, do they hold wrong view or right view? Wrong view, Lord. And is it proper to place confidence in those who hold wrong view? No, Lord. SN 42.13. To avoid wrong view and the ridicule it deserves, the Buddha found it necessary to disclose his knowledge that there are lives after death, and he had to include the perspective not just of one lifetime after death, but of many. This is because there are cases where a person behaves unskillfully in this lifetime but gains a pleasant rebirth immediately after death, and others where a person behaves skillfully in this lifetime but immediately after death gains a painful rebirth, MN 136. A meditator capable of seeing only one lifetime after death, seeing cases like these, would misunderstand the consequences of action. Only when we take into account the overall picture of the complexity of karma and the length of time sometimes needed for actions to bear fruit can we accept that the Buddha's categorical assertions about skillful and unskillful actions might possibly be accurate. So, from the perspective of his awakening, the Buddha saw that the only true understanding of the consequences of actions had to include a full perspective of lives after death. This is why he used this perspective when trying to induce a sense of heedfulness in others, so that they would be motivated to adopt the skillful path. In some cases, this involved describing how skillful and unskillful actions bring comforts and discomforts in future human lives, MN 41 and 8.40. In other cases, it involved describing the pleasures of heaven, which are discussed in only a cursory way, and the horrors of hell, which are discussed in grisly detail. See MN 129 and MN 130. Sometimes he would add the observation that rebirth in the lower realms is much more common than rebirth in the higher realms, SN 20.2. In all cases, he would state that his descriptions and observations came not from hearsay, but his own direct experience. He knew, however, that until they had gained experience for themselves through the practice, his listeners could take his statements on the efficacy of action and the truth of rebirth only on faith. But faith, for him, was not an insistence that you knew what you couldn't really know, or that you accepted unreasonable ideas. It was an admission of ignorance about issues for which you don't have empirical proof, combined with a willingness to adopt the assumptions needed to follow a path to happiness that seems reasonably likely to offer results, MN 27. This is why the Buddha never claimed to offer proof for either the efficacy of action or for rebirth, for he knew that the evidence for these teachings lay beyond the ken of most of his listeners. Concerning the efficacy of action, the best he could do was to point out that those who denied that present action had a role in shaping present experience, because they attributed all experience to past action, to the act of a creator god, or to total randomness, N 3.62, were undercutting any rationale they might claim for teaching others or for following a path of practice. In other words, if present experience is not at least partly due to present actions, there is no way that a path of practice could have any effect. Teaching a path of practice would be a futile activity. The Buddha's argument here was no proof that skillful and unskillful actions actually have consequences, both in the present and on into the future. It simply pointed out the contradiction in teaching otherwise. On the other hand, when you assume both the efficacy of action and its effect on rebirth, you are more likely to behave skillfully. To assume otherwise makes it easy to find excuses for lying, killing, or stealing when faced with poverty or death. And from there, it's easy to extend the excuses to cover times when it's simply more convenient to lie, etc., than to not. But if you assume that your actions have results, and those results will reverberate through many lifetimes, it's easier to stick to your principles not to lie, kill, or steal even under severe duress. And even though you may not know whether these assumptions are true, you cannot plan an action without implicitly wagering on the issue. This is why simply stating, "I don't know," is not an adequate response to the questions of rebirth and the efficacy of karma. The attitude behind it may be honest on one level, but it's dishonest in thinking that this is all that needs to be said, for it ignores the fact that you have to make assumptions about the possible results of your actions every time you act. It's like having money. Regardless of what you do with it, spending it, investing it, or just stashing it away, you're making an implicit wager on how to get the best use of it now and into the future. Your investment strategy can't stop with, "I don't know." If you have any wisdom at all, you have to consider future possibilities and take your chances with what seems to be the safest and most productive use of the resources you've got. So it is with all of our actions. Given that we have to wager one way or another all the time on how to find happiness, the Buddha stated that it's a safer wager to assume that actions bear results that can affect not only this lifetime, but also lifetimes after this, than it is to assume the opposite. In MN 60, for instance, he pointed out that anyone who adheres to the annihilationist view espoused by Ajita Kesakambalin would not be expected to avoid unskillful behavior, whereas those who hold to the opposite, mundane right view, would be expected to avoid unskillful behavior. Then he said of the first group, "With regard to this, an observant person considers thus: if there is no next world, then, with the breakup of the body, after death, this venerable person has made himself safe. But if there is the next world, then this venerable person, with the breakup of the body, after death, will reappear in a plane of deprivation, a bad destination, a lower realm, hell." Even if we didn't speak of the next world and there weren't the true statement of those venerable contemplatives and Brahmins who assert the existence of the next world, this venerable person is still criticized in the here and now by the observant as a person of bad habits and wrong view, one who holds to a doctrine of non-existence. If there really is a next world, then this venerable person has made a bad throw twice, in that he is criticized by the observant here and now, and in that, with the breakup of the body after death, he will reappear in a plane of deprivation, a bad destination, a lower realm, hell. Thus this safe bet teaching, when poorly grasped and poorly adopted by him, covers only one side and leaves behind the possibility of the skillful. MN 60. As for the second group, those who hold to mundane right view and act on it, he said this: "With regard to this, an observant person considers thus: if there is the next world, then this venerable person, with the breakup of the body after death, will reappear in a good destination, a heavenly world. Even if we didn't speak of the next world and there weren't the true statement of those venerable contemplatives and Brahmins, this venerable person is still praised in the here and now by the observant as a person of good habits and right view, one who holds to a doctrine of existence. If there really is a next world, then this venerable person has made a good throw twice, in that he is praised by the observant here and now, and in that, with the breakup of the body after death, he will reappear in a good destination, a heavenly world. Thus this safe bet teaching, when well grasped and well adopted by him, covers both sides and leaves behind the possibility of the unskillful." MN 60. These arguments don't prove the efficacy of action or the truth of rebirth, but they do show that it is a safer, more reasonable, and more honorable policy to assume the truth of these teachings than it would be to assume otherwise. The Buddha didn't press these arguments beyond that point. In other words, he left it to his listeners to decide whether they wanted to recognize that action is an investment that, like all investments, incurs risks. And he left it to them to decide how they wanted to calculate the risks and potentials that action might involve now and into the future. He didn't ask that his listeners all commit themselves to an unquestioning belief in the possibility that their actions might lead to rebirth, but he wasn't interested in teaching anyone who rejected that possibility outright. As we've already noted, he saw that heedfulness lay at the root of all skillful qualities. If a listener couldn't be persuaded to develop an appropriate level of heedfulness around the risks of action, any further teaching would be a waste of time.